Robert and his wife Linda had been married 2 years, having met 18 months previously at college. They were very much in love and considered the perfect pair by many of their close friends. Both being only children, they wanted a large household with 3 or 4 children. They each had well-paying jobs and owned a 2-bedroom apartment when they decided to start their family. However, after 6 months of trying to get pregnant without success, they visited their local clinic, who referred them to a fertility specialist. A month to the day of their initial visit, Robert and Linda held arms while they sat and waited apprehensively in the consultation room, with its pale beige walls adorned with framed certificates and uncomfortable seats for the doctor's imminent arrival. Finally, Dr. Michaels entered, settled into the opposite chair, and gave them a tight grin. "Linda, Robert, thank you both for coming in. As you know, we have run multiple fertility tests on both of you. I'm sorry to tell you this. I know how much you both wanted kids." Linda interrupted the doctor with a low, wounded, hiccuping sound. "Oh God, is it me? I'm the reason." If anything, Dr. Michaels' gaze seemed to soften even more. "No, Linda." The doctor's gaze flickered over to Robert. "In this scenario, it's Robert. We ran multiple tests on Robert's samples, but our findings were conclusive. Robert was completely infertile. It's a rare diagnosis." The doctor droned on, but Robert had tuned him out, deep in thoughts until the doctor's final words. "Unfortunately, Robert can't conceive." Linda let out a cry as their dreams of a big family with lots of children died in that room. Dr. Michaels stood up. Robert followed, and they shook hands. Robert reached for Linda's hand, and they followed the doctor to the reception desk. Dr. Michaels said, "The nurse at the front desk will have your paperwork. Once again, I'm sorry." The doctor turned and entered the hallway, nodded to another couple who then rose and followed him into his room, closing the door behind him. On the drive home, Robert quietly said, "We can still foster." But he already knew the answer. When we first started going through the fertility tests, they had discussed the option of adoption. "No, I wanted your children, our children." She sucked in a shuddering breath, getting her emotions under control. "I love you, Robert. And if fate has decided this for us, then I'm okay with it." She turned to look out of the car window with tears running down her cheeks. Another 3 months went by, and the tension at home was building. While sitting at the dinner table, Robert suggested they divorce. "Linda, you're under 30, beautiful, intelligent, and attractive. You should have no problems finding another partner to love and have children with." Linda angrily replied, "No, I love you. We are meant to be together forever. Don't mention it again." She stomped off to the bedroom and slammed the door. Robert could tell they were growing apart month by month, and their once happy home was anything but. They rarely were intimate. He felt the situation would only worsen as time progressed until they hated each other. With a heavy heart, Robert reluctantly decided the best course of action and made plans. Linda arrived home from work at her usual time of the evening. After entering, she called out, "I'm home, honey." Not getting a reply, she headed for the master bedroom to change clothes. As she approached the partially closed door, she heard a moaning noise emanating from the room. Thinking maybe Robert was unwell, she opened the door to find Robert naked and in a hot embrace with an equally naked blonde woman. Linda went bat-raving mad, screaming and yelling for the two of them to leave, and Robert not to return. Once they departed, still enraged, Linda threw all Robert's clothes into the apartment hallway. What she didn't notice in her anger was most of Robert's clothes, shoes, and the like were older and now rarely worn. She fell to her knees behind the closed door, weeping for what they lost. A month later, Robert was served with divorce papers and signed them immediately before returning them to the law office. He knew Linda would divorce him. Linda's father cheated on her mother. Linda hated cheaters. They destroyed her happy family. Robert immediately tendered his resignation to forestall any chance of reconciliation or counseling. He followed the lead of an older university friend, Ian, who had taken up a consulting position in Ireland 3 years previously. Robert decided to do likewise and took an engineering consulting job in Sydney, Australia, for 2 years. 9 months later, they were officially divorced. Along the way, Robert met many beautiful Aussie women. He dined them, but couldn't find one he clicked with. Linda was always in his thoughts. When Robert returned to the United States, he first visited his mother, catching up on the last 2 years, and started looking for a job. He reconnected with Ian, and discovered while consulting in Ireland, Ian had met a red-haired Irish lass by the name of Aisling. She was 3 years his junior. They married just before Ian returned to the States and were expecting twin daughters. Ian offered Robert a 30% share in his newly formed civil engineering consulting company based in Montgomery, Alabama, where Robert used to live with Linda. Thus, Robert became Ian's business partner. 2 years on, the business was doing well. The company had more clients than it could manage. However, Robert was still alone and missed permanent female companionship. He wanted more than a one-night stand. One Saturday evening, Robert exited the parking lot to meet with colleagues and friends to celebrate his 28th birthday. He noticed his ex-wife Linda walking towards him. Her arm was linked to a tall, moderately handsome man pushing a toddler in a stroller. Not wanting to run into her, Robert ducked into a nearby shop and waited for Linda to pass. When the coast was clear, Robert approached the exit, only for the door to burst open. 2 boys zoomed in and headed for the back of the toy shop. He grabbed the door before it could hit the stop and shatter the glass. Peeking out the doorway, he saw a pregnant woman hurrying down the sidewalk. Holding the door open for her, he said, "They went that way." The woman stumbled on the short stairs as she entered, and Robert automatically held out his arm, which she grasped to keep from falling forward. At that moment, Robert felt an emotional charge surge through his body with a strong attraction to her beauty. "Thank you," came her out-of-breath voice, acknowledging his assistance. "Allow me to help you to a chair," replied Robert, to give her a moment to control her breathing. Seated, the mother said, "I'm sorry for my 2 wayward boys. Sometimes they have one-track minds." Sniggering, Robert said, "I was a boy once myself. I'll go and keep an eye on them before they get into mischief. You take it easy getting up, okay?" Robert located them at the Matchbox cars, trying to decide which they should pick. They were mid-argument, with the older one declaring, "I think the blue one looks better." "No, I like the red, it's faster," said the younger one, declaring with all the certainty of youth. Turning big blue eyes on his brother, he added, "Anyway, Mom said we can only have one, and it's my turn." Robert couched to join the conversation, saying, "I used to collect Matchbox cars when your age." The older boy eyed Robert warily before his curiosity won out. "Do you still have them?" "Yes, they are stored in the attic at my family home," replied Robert. "So, tell me what your names are?" Robert asked. The older boy's wary expression was back, and he stepped slightly in front of his younger sibling. "Mom says not to talk to strangers," Robert nodded. "You are right. I spoke with your mom at the front door and told her I'd check on you guys. I'm Robert." He offered his hand, and both boys then shook his hand firmly. Finally relaxing a little, the older boy responded, "I'm Peter, and this is my younger brother Paul." Paul, not to be left out, said, "I'm 5. Then Peter proudly said, "And I'm nearly 7. Peter suddenly became alert, looking around, realizing their mother wasn't with them. "Paul, we've lost Mom. We gotta find her." "I helped your mother to a seat at the front of the store," Robert tells Peter. "She's resting, and I'm sure she will be here shortly." Scolding himself, "It was my job as the eldest to watch out for her," Peter said with a scowl that looked out of place on his young face. "She's pregnant, you know?" Sensing an odd family dynamic, Robert asked, "Peter, where's your father?" Peter quietly responded, "Dad died in the sandbox." Taken aback by Peter's statement, Robert lightly touched Peter's shoulder and softly replied, "I'm sorry for your loss." Robert's heart went out to them, their mother, and their small family. The boy's mother finally arrived and admonished them, "If you 2 run off again like that, there will be no cars for either of you." "Yes, Mom," they said in unison. Thinking quickly, Robert grabbed a pink toy pony and said, "I have to buy a present for my niece, and would be happy to purchase both cars for the boys as my birthday treat." The boy's mother quickly said no. But seeing an opening, the boys pleaded, "Aw, Mom." "Hold on, I thought you were a shop assistant," Stephanie said. "No, I just came in to purchase this," Robert replied, while holding up the toy. Peter said, "Mom, Robert told us when he was a boy he also used to collect Matchbox cars." Noticing their mother's indecision, Robert went to the cash register and handed over his credit card. The deal was done. At the dark look Robert got from the boy's mother, he tried to ease the mood. "Well, today is my birthday after all. Surely you don't begrudge me sharing my happy day with Peter and Paul." As Robert handed over the toy boxes, the boys responded, "Thank you, Robert." "You are most welcome, boys." "Okay, Peter, Paul, you managed to get what you want, now out of the shop," said Stephanie firmly. They all exited the shop and the boys took off towards home. Peter shouted, "It's only a few blocks, Mom." Their mother quickly called them back, and they returned to her side without too much grumbling. "Hi, I'm Robert." He held out his hand. While shaking his hand, the boy's mother replied, "I'm Stephanie." Robert asked, "So, Stephanie, where is your car parked?" "It's broken. We walked," replied Stephanie. "Okay, so how far is it from here to your place, Stephanie?" 5 blocks, she responded sourly. Surprised at the distance, Robert said, "I'll drive you and the boys home. My car is only parked a short distance away." Stephanie shook her head vehemently, saying, "You could be an axe murderer for all I know." "Stephanie, it's now 5 in the evening, and it is getting too late to walk," replied Robert. Robert then offered his driver's license and suggested, "Call a friend, give them my details from my license as proof of my identity." "I don't have a cell phone. Paul dropped it and it stopped working." Robert offered his phone, and Stephanie agreed, entering her boss Jim's cell phone number. "Hello?" said Jim. "Hi, Jim. It's Stephanie. I'm in a bind. The boys and I are at Andrew's toy store, and it's getting late. We have been offered a ride home by a man the boys met in the shop. He suggested I call a friend and give his driver's license details as proof of his identity. Would that be all right with you? Stephanie, I would come and get you myself, except my in-laws are here. So yes, that's a good idea. Also, text me a photo of his license. When you get home, text me you're safe," responded Jim. "Okay, thank you, Jim," Stephanie said before ending the call. Stephanie did as Jim suggested, while they waited for Robert to retrieve his car. Robert pulled up to the curb outside the shop minutes later. Stephanie handed Robert his phone, saying, "I called my boss, Jim, and he's got all your details." "Okay, I'll call my friend Ian and tell him I will be late." Robert took the phone, then called Ian and explained he was helping a pregnant woman and her 2 sons in a predicament and would be late for the get-together. He promised to tell Ian all the details later. With everyone nestled into the small Honda CR-V and the boys' seatbelts locked in place, they headed off. Stephanie gave Robert directions. Robert noticed a pizza shop on their way, pulled in, and said to Stephanie, "As I told you, today is my 28th birthday. Would you be willing to share your family with me and help me celebrate? The only family I have is 2 states away." Not getting an immediate outright no, Robert called out, "Who would like pizza for dinner?" Cheers came from the rear seat. Stephanie protested that he was using the boys against her, but had second thoughts, as she commented they were probably all tired of macaroni and cheese. She said, "All right, go ahead, just this once." Stephanie, Robert, Peter, and Paul entered the pizzeria. After some discussion, they settled on 3 large pizzas and sodas. Robert noticed an ice cream cake in the freezer and added that to the list for dessert. While they waited, the boys played with their Matchbox cars. Stephanie said, "Well, Robert, tell me about yourself before I allow you into my home." "I'm an only child. My father passed away while I was in senior high school. My mother still lives in our family home in Oklahoma. I left home for university here in Alabama to become a civil engineer and married a girl I met at college. Unfortunately, it was discovered I couldn't have children, and that's all my wife ever wanted, so we divorced 4 years ago. I worked in Australia for 2 years, which helped me get over the heartache. Returning to the U.S., I reconnected with a fellow university colleague, and together we established a civil engineering company." After a pause, Robert asked, "What about you, Stephanie?" "Jeff, my husband, was my high school sweetheart. He was 1 year older and had graduated top of his year in high school. As long as I had known him, Jeff wanted to become a helicopter pilot, and so he signed up for a 10-year commitment and was posted to Army Flight School at Fort Novosel." "That's a long-term commitment," Robert interjected, getting a sharp look from Stephanie for interrupting her. She continued, "Well, yes, I was not happy he didn't consult with me first. When he told his parents, that's when the arguments started. Jeff's father expected him to take on the family business. My parents refused to grant me permission to marry Jeff. Hearing that I was pregnant sparked a storm of angry words and accusations. So we ran away, married, and moved into a house on the Army base some 600 miles from our hometown." "So you followed Jeff's dream of becoming a pilot," commented Robert. Yes, why wouldn't I? I loved him and wanted us to be together and make a family. The birth of our 2 sons quickly followed. At the same time, Jeff undertook basic combat training followed by an Army officer candidate school and training as a helicopter aviation warrant officer, which all took 3 years. Then Jeff was called to serve in Afghanistan. 2 years later, he returned home, commissioned as a lieutenant, and this baby was conceived, she said while rubbing her stomach. Jeff was offered a second deployment, which he had already accepted. That was a bit unfair to you and the boys, Robert mumbled. Stop interjecting, I'm telling the story. Now where was I? Oh yes. 3 weeks of Jeff's month-long furlough were spent at a seaside resort. He regaled the boys with bedtime stories of near misses as his helicopter skimmed over the barren hilly landscape of the Sandbox, as he called Afghanistan. He told them of his adventures and the challenge of safely ferrying fellow soldiers to and from missions like Iron Man. Stephanie paused to take a breath, and then with a hiccup whispered, Barely 3 months into his second tour, the helicopter he was piloting was shot down over the Helmand Desert with no survivors. I packed up, started driving, the car broke down outside of Montgomery, and we ended up here. Robert reached out and squeezed Stephanie's hand. I'm so sorry for your loss. Thank you. Stephanie was interrupted when their order was called out. Exiting the pizza shop with dinner, Robert drove toward Stephanie's small 2-room apartment. On the way, as the car passed by, Stephanie pointed out through the window. That's Jim's bakery. He allows me to bring the boys to work at 6. I walk the boys to the local elementary school during my morning break. I finish work at 3 when the boys return from school. Unfortunately, the building's elevator, where Stephanie lived, was broken again, so they all had to climb the 2 flights of stairs to the apartment. Upon entry, Stephanie reminded the boys to wash their hands, and Robert followed. Stephanie used Robert's cell phone to text Jim, letting him know she had arrived home safely, and Robert was staying for dinner. After consuming their meal, the boys showered and headed off to bed. Paul asked, Robert, can you read to us a story? Looking to Stephanie for approval, she nodded. Peter offered a well-worn Iron Man comic, a story it appeared the boys knew by heart. While reading, Robert noticed a photo in a glass frame of much younger boys with a man in an army uniform, and assumed it was the boy's father. Returning to the small lounge placed half in the kitchen, he found a weary Stephanie rubbing her swollen feet. Robert dropped to his knees and massaged her feet until she fell asleep. Covering her with a small blanket, he let himself out, locking the door behind him. On the drive home, Robert thought about how impressed he was with how well both boys behaved. They didn't complain and were a credit to Stephanie. They were 2 great-looking kids that any father would be proud of to have as sons. Midweek, Robert found himself in the bakery where Stephanie worked. Robert asked for Jim. Hi, Jim. I'm Robert. Pleased to meet you, he said as they shook hands. Stephanie said she worked here? Jim immediately recognized Robert's name, saying, Thank you, Robert, for assisting Stephanie and the boys to their home the other evening. The pleasure was all mine. Is Stephanie in by any chance? Robert asked. Stephanie, called out Jim. When she arrived, Jim said, Take a lunch break with Robert. Looking slightly annoyed, Stephanie directed Robert to a nearby park where they sat on a bench seat with some sandwiches and coffee from the bakery. Taking the offered sandwich from Stephanie, Robert said, Thank you. I have purchased a cell phone for you in case of emergencies. It's registered to my mobile carrier account, and it costs me next to nothing. I have programmed in Jim's and my cell numbers in case of emergencies. When contractions begin, feel free to call me day or night. I'm happy to take you to hospital. If not, you can now call a cab. Not happy with his intentions, Stephanie reluctantly took the phone and charger, putting them into her purse. I'm not happy with being given handouts, but I understand your reasoning. Next time you decide to interfere, please talk to me first, okay? Sorry, I realize you are an independent woman, but I have become attached to the boys in the short time I've known them. If anything should happen to you, Peter and Paul would be devastated, and who knows where they would end up, remarked Robert. Stephanie paused eating for a moment, then said, Yes, I can see that, and it also worries me, so thank you for your thoughtfulness. I will keep the phone with me at all times. So why don't you have a car? Asked Robert. With a catch in her voice, Stephanie picked up where she left off the other evening, saying, Jeff's funeral service was held on the Army base. When asked where Jeff should be interned, I gave the Army his parents' contact details, and his body was shipped back home for burial. We couldn't stay in Army housing and had to move out. I didn't want to return home for my parents to say, "Told you so." Then there were Jeff's parents, who would blame me for encouraging their only son. Robert noticed a tear run down Stephanie's cheek. He lightly touched her arm and said, "Stephanie, there is no need to explain further." Stephanie said, "No. I need to confide in someone, and it may as well be you. As a service widow, I'm receiving a part military pension and covered by their health insurance until I remarry. 2 weeks before Jeff's death, I discovered I was 8 weeks pregnant. I had no choice but to drive back home with my tail between my legs and beg Mom and Dad for forgiveness. However, that didn't happen. 2 hours into our journey, Jeff's car started acting up, coughing and sputtering, blowing smoke. I pull off the interstate onto the Montgomery exit. The car only managed to make it to the service center over there, she said, pointing across the street. Stephanie stopped to catch her breath, then continued with a stronger voice. While they were assessing the car, I found Jim's bakery and bought lunch for 2 hungry boys. We sat at this very seat, and the boys played on those swings. After lunch, we returned to pick up the car, only to be told the engine had blown something inside and would require a new engine. I had some savings, but needed more for another engine or a second-hand car. Then I remembered the job wanted notice at the bakery. I went back and applied for the job. Jim took mercy on our family. He even told me about a nearby apartment the previous employee had rented. Jim made a phone call and we moved in that very afternoon. We were only supposed to stay until I got enough money to buy a car so we could continue our journey. That was 5 months ago. We settled in, I made friends at the bakery, and the boys started school and were making friends. Now I don't want to go home so much. I like the warmer climate and the smaller city. The people are friendlier and welcoming. But the coming baby could make or break the family. I could contact Dad and Mom and apologize, but they made such a big issue out of us leaving. I don't feel Jeff and I were wrong to chase our dreams, regardless of how it turned out. I'm starting to enjoy my independence, Stephanie firmly stated. Robert could see her side of the situation. He, too, enjoyed his independence to chase his dream of becoming a civil engineer, leaving home for Auburn's engineering school 2 states away. As Robert escorted Stephanie back to the bakery, she slipped her hand into the crook of his arm as we started down the street. Robert asked, "Could I visit you and the boys next Saturday?" Stephanie agreed and sent him on his way with a kiss on his cheek. Robert arrived at Stephanie's apartment around 10 the following Saturday morning. Stephanie appeared busy catching up on housework. He offered to help, but Stephanie suggested taking Peter and Paul to the park swings instead. After 2 hours at the park, Robert picked up lunch from the deli, and they returned to the apartment. After lunch, the family sat down to play a well-worn game of Monopoly, whiling away a pleasant afternoon. After finishing dinner of spaghetti with bread rolls, which Stephanie had a plentiful supply of, Robert surprised the boys with 2 new Iron Man comics he picked up earlier that morning. The story continued from where the older comic finished. They lay on their bunk beds while Robert read to them until they finally fell asleep, weary from the day of playing. Stephanie thanked him for entertaining the boys, which allowed her to get some much-needed washing and cleaning done. She pecked him on the lips at the door as he left. Encouraged by Stephanie's response, Robert continued to visit each Saturday, taking the boys to parks, car shows, and the zoo, giving Stephanie a chance to rest and do some housekeeping. He found himself having a great affection for the boys, and especially Stephanie. So late on a Saturday evening, when the boys were asleep, Robert sat down with her. "Stephanie, I have strong feelings for you and the boys." He paused to get Stephanie's reaction. Stephanie was not surprised by his statement. Taking his hand, she answered, "I have become smitten with you as well, and would like to see where the relationship takes my family, Robert." "Okay, let's keep getting together as a family and we'll date some to get to know each other personally. How does that sound?" suggested Robert. "Robert, I would love to go out for dinner, just you and me." Life continued, and their romance strengthened, finding common likes and dislikes. They discovered the enjoyment of swing dancing, and goodnight kisses lasted longer each time. The boys were easy to please. They enjoyed doing stuff outdoors with Robert, whether it be a simple day's hiking in a nature reserve or visiting a water park. Top on their list would be the amusement park. With the family relationship ever improving, Robert committed to purchasing a 4-bedroom apartment from a coworker heading for a divorce. Most importantly, It was in the boys' school zone. He hoped after asking Stephanie to marry him, he could persuade her and the boys to move in after the birth of her baby, thus making for a safe and happy family home. If not, it was still a bargain at the price. He could use the extra bedrooms as a home office, storage, and a guest room for his mother to visit. Robert decided to keep his old one-bedroom apartment and lease it as an investment. The boys were burning off some energy at a local playground the following weekend. Stephanie went to get coffee from a nearby cafe and to find a toilet. Such is the life of an 8-month pregnant woman with a baby pressing on her bladder. Robert kept a close eye on Peter and Paul, who were using the playground tube slide, when he was suddenly accosted by his ex-wife, Linda. A small child in a stroller accompanied her, and he assumed the girl was Linda's daughter. The girl scrambled out of the stroller and ran to join the other children on the swings. Linda yelled at the departing child, "Don't go too far. Keep in sight." Linda scolded Robert, "You're a jerk, Robert, forcing me to divorce you and then running away." She went on. "It had been 4 months after the divorce when by accident at a bar I saw the blonde woman with whom you shared our bed. I approached her, intending to give her a piece of my mind. She was initially confused when I asked where you were, forcing me to go into more detail. Then I was astonished when she burst out laughing, saying it was all a practical joke, and you paid her $100 and told her I enjoyed making up like that. I would kick you out for the night and ravage you the next." Completely stumped for words, I stood there until she told me to move on because I was scaring her clientele. "I'm sorry, Linda. I thought it would be for the best," Robert responded timidly. "After meeting her," Linda said, "it dawned on me why you had cheated. I was so angry and tried to make contact, but you had disappeared. 7 months after the divorce was final, I met my husband, Tony. Rose is our 2-year-old thanks to you, Robert. I'm happy you found another partner to love and together have a daughter. I still don't regret what I did," Robert added. "The final result was worth the heartache for both of us." Linda gave Robert a hug and a peck on the cheek. Stephanie returned at that moment, frowning. Robert quickly introduced Stephanie and her 2 sons, Peter and Paul, to Linda, then excused himself to buy sodas with the boys in tow. Linda and Stephanie watched Robert and the boys depart and observed how comfortably they interacted with each other, like family. "Oh, he forgot his coffee," said Stephanie, then offered the cup to Linda. "Would you like it?" "Yes, please, it so happens we drink it the same way," came Linda's reply. After a sip of coffee, Stephanie told Linda, "Robert has become a dad to my sons. He has been careful not to take their father's place. Robert has been a great help with the boys as I feel so tired with the baby on the way. It doesn't completely surprise me. Robert is a very giving man. He would have made an exceptional father if we could have had children." Linda continued with more anger in her voice. However, Robert decided for his own selfish reasons to manipulate a situation to make it look like he was having an affair and forcing a divorce action. Surprised, Stephanie said, "I was unaware of Robert's motives in getting the divorce, only that you had divorced. However, I have seen firsthand Robert's manipulative side." Rose chose that moment to return, saying, "Mommy, I'm thirsty." "Okay, hop into the stroller and we will go home to Daddy," replied Linda. Turning to Stephanie, Linda said, "It's been nice talking with you, Stephanie. Can I suggest we keep in touch? Recite your cell number and I'll add you to my call list." "Yes, let's do that." When Robert and the boys returned, Linda was gone, and Stephanie had a "we need to talk" look. Robert had just got the boys settled into bed for the night when he found Stephanie sitting at the kitchen table with a glass of water and a drink waiting for him. Stephanie announced, "We need to clear the air." Sitting down, Robert inquired, "You have something to ask me?" Stephanie said, "You told me you were divorced but didn't say you tricked Linda into it." Sighing, Robert replied, "Someone had to take a stand. Otherwise we would have ended up hating each other, or Linda would have walked in one day to say she was pregnant and divorcing me. I didn't want it to get to that stage. I understand I hurt Linda's feelings by my actions and she was angry with me. But look at the outcome. She's married with a child, which is all she ever wanted." Robert said, "Did Linda tell you I had asked her for a divorce, and she refused?" "No," Stephanie replied. "But we need to be truthful to continue our relationship." "Yes, I agree, and I cannot think of any more surprises, so can we go forward?" Robert reached over the table and held Stephanie's hand. Stephanie smiled brightly, stood up, came around and sat on Robert's lap, folding her arms around his neck. Robert slipped his arms around her waist. Then they kissed with a passion Robert had been missing, the physical connection of two people simply kissing, showing genuine affection for one another. Stephanie pushed herself up, standing with her hand on his shoulder, and said, "Now go before I forget myself." At the apartment door, Robert mentioned, "Oh, I forgot to tell you, I'm off to Atlanta this week for business, but I'll be back by Friday. Also, the family has been invited to a barbecue lunch at Ian and Isling's home next Saturday. There you will be able to meet all my work colleagues. Would you like to come?" "Yes," came Stephanie's reply. "Great. So, pack your swimsuits. Ian has a pool. I'll pick you and the boys up at 11 next Saturday." The boys were in bed early on Saturday evening, dead tired from swimming and eating all afternoon. Stephanie and Robert relaxed with coffee sitting at the kitchen table. Robert asked, "Where will Peter and Paul stay during your hospital confinement?" "Funny you should bring that up. You're not going to believe this, but I had arrangements to pay the 16-year-old daughter of a neighbor 2 doors down to mind them overnight, walk them to school and home again. Her mother was happy for a small fee to look after all their meals. I have been putting money away for the last 3 months for this event. Well, the daughter got caught using illegal substances at school last Friday. She has been suspended and arraigned before a juvenile court, so I'm not using her or her mother now. It has put me in a spot of bother, and I was going to ask if you could stay here during my time in hospital. Yes, I could do that. Feeding them is easy. Dropping them off at school and picking them up is not a problem when you're a boss. However, I had the chance to purchase a 4-bedroom condominium from a coworker going through a divorce a month ago. He has taken up a position in Europe and needed the funds quickly to establish himself. It has all the modern conveniences, a safe neighborhood, a good location, and it happens to be the boys' school zone. So, would it be all right for the boys to stay with me while you are in hospital? Before you say no, how about next Saturday I take you and the boys over to check out the place, Robert said. What about tomorrow, Sunday? Replied Stephanie. Sorry, the painters just finished Friday. I'm starting to move in tomorrow. Okay, next Saturday it is, replied Stephanie. Robert finished his coffee, and they kissed goodnight at the door. On the following Tuesday night at 10, Robert got a call from Stephanie to tell him her water had broken. Then she called Jackson Hospital to let them know she was coming. Grabbing her hospital bag, she roused the boys and they waited for Robert to arrive outside the apartment complex. Arriving at the hospital, Stephanie was ushered into the maternity wing. Robert and the boys followed to be left in the waiting room. Initially excited, the boys eventually fell into a fitful sleep, sitting on either side of Robert with his arm around their shoulders. Even Robert nodded off for a while. Early the following day, a nurse approached them and asked if they wanted to see their baby sister. The boys gave a cursory glance at the baby, with a look on their faces as if to say, "Is that what all the fuss was about?" Robert congratulated Stephanie and kissed her on the cheek, then took a peek at the sleeping newborn baby girl, Mary Sue. Stephanie used her mother-in-law's name, Sue, as a middle name to keep it in the family. Robert pulled the small pink toy pony from his pocket and slipped it into Mary's bassinet. Stephanie questioned, "I thought that was for your niece." Robert responded sadly, "I don't have any close relatives, being an only child." Standing, Robert took out his phone and photographed mother and child. Stephanie started breastfeeding Mary, and the nurse ushered them out. At the door, Robert stated, while looking at Stephanie, "Well, the boys and I are off to celebrate with a cigar." Stephanie gave him a startled look, and Mary slipped off her. He smiled and said, "Got you." Robert had promised the boys the night before he would take them to the Waffle House for breakfast. After a hearty breakfast, Robert drove to the new condominium, where he showed the boys around, explaining he hoped this would be theirs and Stephanie's new home. One room was red and one blue, Peter and Paul's favorite colors. The framed photo of the boys with their father was on their bedside drawers. Robert had made a color copy a week previous. He felt it was important they always remembered their father. Excited was not the word for it. The boys explored, going from room to room. In the living room, they found a big screen TV with an Xbox connected to it. 2 bathrooms, a large kitchen, and a back balcony provided a city view. The boys wanted to move in that very day. However, a wiser head prevailed, so they retired to their old apartment and packed enough clothes for a 3-day stay. That evening, visiting Stephanie and Mary, the boys found it hard to keep still. Their mother noticed. "What's up with you two?" All Peter would say was, "We have a surprise for you when we return home." Finally, they settled down, reading the latest Iron Man comics. Taking this opportunity, Robert took Stephanie's left hand and said, "Stephanie, will you marry me?" Then, he produced a yellow gold diamond engagement ring. The boys peered at the couple and waited patiently for their mother's reply. Initially surprised by the location of Robert's proposal, Stephanie was lost for words and looked back and forth between the boys and Robert. The boys nodded. Stephanie held up her wedding finger to show she still had Jeff's engagement and wedding ring. Fully aware, Robert retrieved a small red de Cartier box from his pocket, opening it to display a yellow gold necklace. Robert explained, "I understand your reluctance to give up Jeff's wedding rings, so I purchased a chain so you can wear them close to your heart." A relieved Stephanie responded heartily, "Yes." The boys cheered and chanted, "Kiss her, kiss her." Robert bent down to kiss Stephanie, who quickly threw her arms around Robert's neck and held him in place while their lips touched. All the while, the boys encouraged them to continue. Stephanie smiled at Robert as they broke their kiss. Robert had just gained a loving family. Stephanie was a happy woman, with the ring on her finger and 2 rings hanging around her neck. She had a healthy baby girl, 2 wonderful boys, and a man to love and grow old with, and security for their family. They were due to pick up Mary and Stephanie in the afternoon. That morning, Robert took the boys out car shopping. They toured a couple of the new car yards, finally settling on a Jaguar SUV, adding 3 child seats just in time to pick up mother and daughter. Meeting Stephanie in her hospital room, they gathered her things, put Mary into her car carrier, and then made their way to the hospital parking lot. On the way, Stephanie said, "Jim and a few other women bakery workers visited this morning. They congratulated me on Mary's birth." And then one of the ladies noticed the engagement ring and wanted all the details. Jim lingered and said he was especially happy for me and my future, telling them you were a good man. I told him I would call next week about work. Arriving at an unfamiliar car, Stephanie asked, "What happened to the other car?" Robert explained, "Now we are engaged. I decided it was too small for our growing family. I'm sure you will appreciate the safety child seats for Peter and Paul, harness for Mary's baby carrier, and the overall design of a more expensive car ensuring increased safety." When they didn't turn off to the street leading to her apartment, Stephanie said, "Robert, where are we going?" The boys exited the car, and Stephanie followed with Mary. Robert parked it in the garage and closed the roller door. They piled into a working elevator that took them to the 3rd floor. Robert carried the baby carrier with Mary and followed Stephanie, who was tugged down the hallway by the boys to the 2nd apartment on that floor. She should not have been surprised when Peter took out a key and opened the door. The boys rushed forward, pulling Stephanie along to show her their bedrooms after the commotion had diminished. They all gathered in the lounge room. Robert said to Stephanie, "Now you have been given the royal tour. Would you like to share this condo with me and make it our home? It's your choice. If not, I'll take you and the boys back to your apartment. What do you say?" The boys stood without uttering a sound, looking expectantly at their mother. "All right, you 3 devils, we will stay and turn this bachelor's apartment into our home." Peter, Paul, and Richard cheered and did a low 5. Stephanie announced, "Tomorrow, we will return to the old apartment, pack up all our worldly goods, and move in." Robert led Stephanie to the nursery with a bed, a bassinet, and a changing table for Mary. Stephanie said, "What would you have done if I said no?" Robert replied, "Simple, move it all to your old apartment. I purchased them for Mary." Robert explained his bedroom was next door, with a queen bed and attached bathroom. It didn't take a genius to realize it was the master bedroom. He said that while they were officially engaged, he would sleep there until they were married, and Stephanie would have the nursery with Mary. Stephanie guessed Robert wished her and the boys would all move in together, and as they have been living here for the past few days, why not? She happily moved into the nursery with Mary. Later that evening, all was quiet in the house. The children were fast asleep after a big day. Stephanie returned from the bathroom and met Robert in the hallway as he was heading for his bedroom. They stopped and looked into each other's eyes for a moment. Stephanie stood on her toes. She felt Robert's hands grasp her waist. drawing her into his embrace while she pulled Robert's head down into what seemed like a never-ending kiss. Stephanie arched into Robert as goosebumps covered her body. Breaking their kiss, she felt Robert's stiffness press against her abdomen and smiled at him. "Good night, darling," she offered, entering her room and closing the door, leaving Robert hot and bothered. Over the following month, Stephanie and Robert visited several furniture stores, purchasing various items to turn a bachelor's pad into a family home. It took a couple of months for the family to settle in when Robert approached Stephanie. "I have been keeping my mother Judith up to date on all the recent events in my life. Our engagement, the birth of Mary, our new home, and she wanted to meet you, Mary, and the boys. Would it be an issue if she came to visit? I cannot see a problem and would love to meet Judith." "Yes, please invite her," responded Stephanie. Robert flew his mother to the city to meet them all. Arriving home from the airport, he introduced Judith to Stephanie and Mary, and an excited Peter and Paul. Judith had a present for the boys, Robert's collection of 50 old Matchbox cars, which kept them busy for days. Over the intervening weeks, Judith and Stephanie got along famously, as Judith treated Stephanie like a long-lost daughter. Judith planned to stay and help with the wedding preparations. So, it wasn't long before the boys began calling her Grandma Judith. A month into Judith's stay, with Mary asleep, the boys at school, and Robert working, Judith and Stephanie sat on the balcony in the mid-morning sun drinking coffee. Stephanie asked Judith, "What was Robert like as a boy?" Gathering her thoughts, Judith replied, "He was a good baby, slept through most nights. If he did wake, he settled down quickly. As a young boy at school, he excelled, always studious and a team player. He especially loved playing ice hockey and has several trophies on a shelf in his bedroom." "And his father?" asked Stephanie. Robert's father, William, was an attorney, running a solo practice. "I had to move back home after my parents died in a car accident, and as I had no romantic attachments to the city, I decided to stay. William's business was growing leaps and bounds, and advertised for a paralegal. And that's how we met," explained Judith. Stephanie said, "I'm sorry, Judith, but I have to ask, was Robert selfish or manipulative as a boy?" Taken aback by Stephanie's question, Judith paused. "Well, yes, I suppose Robert was mildly selfish, maybe because he was an only child. However, you can't be selfish with children, they become your first priority. I've seen the way he dotes on Mary and Peter and Paul. I think you have seen the last of his selfishness. As to being manipulative, I don't remember any instances. Why do you ask?" "Judith, are you aware of the reason for Robert's and Linda's divorce?" asked Stephanie. "I thought Linda started divorce proceedings against Robert because he couldn't have children?" "No, Robert manipulated a situation where it appeared he was cheating on Linda, and thus the divorce," explained Stephanie. "I had no idea. All this time I have been blaming Linda for their breakup. How did you find this out?" "We met Linda by accident. Robert introduced me to her. Linda told me her version of events. Later, when I discussed what Linda said, he didn't deny it. In fact, he was rather proud of the fact." "Well, I never saw that side of him and hope he doesn't make a habit of it," said a slightly distressed Judith. "However, having said that, I don't think I could find a more doting father for my children. And he is a very loving and attentive husband," stated Stephanie. As Judith had nothing to draw her back home, the family unanimously voted for her to make the stay permanent. Paul happily moved into Peter's room, and Judith used Paul's. Grandma had now become another member of their growing family. She put her old home on the market. Stephanie wanted to wait until Mary was 1 and a toddler before they married, so that she could be their flower girl. With Judith in residence and happy to babysit the children, that allowed Robert and Stephanie to make a day trip to Atlanta and the Cartier boutique, where they chose wedding rings. Later, in the summer holidays, Stephanie and Robert married at a small church gathering. Robert's best man was Ian. Both boys were ring bearers. Peter had Robert's ring, and Paul held his mother's. Mary just enjoyed all the attention of being a flower girl. Jim walked Stephanie down the aisle. A big surprise was a 3-month pregnant Linda as maid of honor, supported by her husband, Ted, Rose, and 9-month-old son, Rod. A welcome addition to the wedding party was Ian's family, Aisling, and their twin 3-year-old red-haired daughters, Isadora and Isabel, who were the official flower girls. While Stephanie was still reluctant to contact her parents, having Judith there made it family. Robert booked a private room at a local restaurant for the reception, knowing they had a live band where they could have a wedding dance. They all celebrated as a family with good friends and workplace colleagues, finishing at 10. They were leaving early the following day for their honeymoon in the Bahamas for 2 weeks. Robert suggested they all go. After all, they were a family now. Robert and Stephanie had discussed honeymoon locations and decided on Nassau, the capital of the Bahamas, for 2 weeks. Stephanie booked a suite for herself, Robert, and Mary, and another 2-room suite for Judith, Peter, and Paul. Arriving late in the afternoon, after a 5-hour nonstop flight, the boys wanted to swim at the nearby beach. After dinner with everyone worn out from the early rise, long flight, and afternoon of swimming, they all retired early to their rooms for the night. Mary woke Stephanie in the early morning for a diaper change and feed. Once Mary had settled back down, feeling frisky, Stephanie shed her nightdress and slipped into bed naked. Sliding her hand into Robert's pajamas, she began to massage him, making him excited quickly. Robert awakened to a pair of lips on his and a warm hand on him. Without a thought, unable to contain his desire any longer, Robert took hold of Stephanie's waist, lifting her onto his abdomen. Stephanie placed her hands on each of Robert's shoulders, their lips locked. She was doing all the work, so Robert lay back to enjoy the ride until they both finished. Stephanie stiffened and convulsed as Robert pushed up, embedding himself up to the fullest. Stephanie then collapsed onto Robert, still shaking. Robert embraced her and rolled them onto his side, where they fell into a lover's sleep. After another busy morning of swimming and a light lunch, Judith and the boys napped in their rooms late in the afternoon. Stephanie and Robert made love again, accompanied by a tropical breeze with warm beams of sunlight entering through the balcony doorway. They fell asleep in each other's arms. But it only lasted a short while before the boys started banging on the interconnecting door, complaining they were hungry, and waking up Mary, who also demanded to be changed and fed. Robert loved it. That was what families are all about. The whole family toured the island, ate delicious food nightly, swam, snorkeled, viewed the reef, and generally relaxed. And every night Stephanie and Robert made love. But all too soon the 2 weeks were up, and the family returned to Alabama. As an extended family, they settled into a routine. Robert used his old Honda to travel to work, and Stephanie used the Jag to shuttle the boys to and from school. It was only a short time before the boys wanted to play soccer with their school friends. Soon the family found themselves cheering the team on frosty Saturday mornings, coffee in hand, chatting with other parents around the field. Peter had recently turned 9, and one Saturday evening in bed, Robert asked, "Stephanie, what do you think about signing the boys up for ice hockey? I played when I was their age." Stephanie thought momentarily and remembered Jeff breaking his arm in Division 10. "Sorry, Robert, I feel they are too young and not coordinated enough, perhaps when they reach junior high school." Robert proposed an alternative. "Okay, how about I buy tickets for the boys and myself to the next NHL game held nearby?" "Okay." Stephanie noticed somewhere in the last year, Peter and Paul had started calling Robert Dad. She saw a small smile appear on his face each time they did. Father was reserved for their biological dad. That very evening found the 3 adults sitting in the lounge. With the television having been turned off, Robert decided now was the time to approach a subject with Stephanie he had been putting off. Robert said, "Stephanie, isn't it time to introduce Peter, Paul, and Mary to their grandparents on both sides?" Not getting a negative response, Robert carried on. "Can I suggest we visit them next summer holidays?" "I don't know. The gap of 10 years may be too large to overcome. Anyhow, they have never tried to contact me," Stephanie said with a certain amount of venom in her voice. "Stephanie, look at how well the children interact with my mother. Surely you don't begrudge them their family-related grandparents. One day it may come back to haunt you, but it's your choice." Nothing more was said on the matter for some months when Stephanie brought up the subject one evening after dinner, with only Judith present. "Judith, what do you think of introducing the children to their grandparents?" Judith looked at Stephanie thoughtfully. "I don't see how it can hurt. They know nothing of your disagreement with your parents and in-laws. I understand it may be difficult for you, but the children could be a bridge to reconcile your differences. Family is very important. I only wish I had more," she said. Later that evening, as they lay snuggled together in bed, Stephanie confided in Robert. "I have decided you and Judith made good points, and we should attempt to make contact with my parents and introduce their grandchildren." Robert responded by giving Stephanie a hug, then asked, "Should we contact them first or just turn up unannounced?" "Let's surprise them," responded Stephanie with a giggle. So, travel plans were made. It was a long 600-mile trip to Cincinnati, and Robert planned to take 2 days, stopping regularly to see the sights to make it more enjoyable and educational. Once Robert had laid out the route and prepared to leave on a Thursday, Stephanie booked a motel family room for the first overnight stop and one in her hometown. They waved goodbye to Judith. She had balked at the lengthy car trip and decided to stay home. She had recently made friends with a couple of the older condo owners, and they got together regularly to play bridge. The boys were excited the day they left in the Jag. They had their iPads loaded with their favorite movies, hopefully to keep them entertained once they got bored of looking out the car window at the countryside. The first stop had a vintage farm machinery museum, and they spent a good hour there before eating a packed lunch at the local park with swings, which allowed the boys to burn off some energy. The next stop was for the overnight break. The motel had a swimming pool, and they all jumped in to refresh themselves before dinner in the restaurant. They were on the road by 7 the next day and had a quick lunch at a mom-and-pop diner. It was a new experience for the boys. They arrived in Stephanie's hometown at 4. By 10 the following day, the family ventured out to Stephanie's parents' family home. They did a drive-by first to ensure someone was at home, then bit the bullet and pulled into the drive. Robert had coached the boys to call Stephanie's mother and father, grandma and grandpa, and be welcoming. Stephanie, Peter, and Paul exited the car, and Robert followed with Mary. They walked up to the door where Peter rang the bell. Stephanie's mother opened the door and was surprised by strangers standing at her stoop. She was about to shut the door when Stephanie said, "Hello, Mom." "Oh my, Stephanie, is that you?" came her mother's whispered reply. "Yes, Mom. These are my children, Peter, Paul, Mary, and my husband Robert. Boys, say hello to your grandmother." The boys and Mary chorused, "Hello, Grandma." "Are we welcome, Mother? If not, we will leave," queried Stephanie. Her mother opened her arm and welcomed Stephanie. They hugged while the rest looked on with smiling faces. "Welcome, Robert. I'm Wendy," Stephanie's mother said, and opened the door for them to enter. Once inside, Wendy dropped to one knee. She didn't have to ask for a hug. The boys piped up, announcing, "I'm Peter, I'm Paul, and this is Mary, our sister." All Robert could think was how proud he was of the boys. Grandma said to the boys, "Grandpa was out in the backyard. Go find him." That was all the encouragement they needed. They ventured into the backyard to find Grandpa rolling around on the lawn, grappling with the boys. Well, that could not have gone better if Robert had planned it. Stephanie's father stood and opened his arms, saying, "Welcome home, daughter." They hugged like there was no tomorrow. Breaking their embrace, Stephanie said, "Dad, this is my husband, Robert. Robert, meet Bill." They shook hands. Wendy soon brewed some coffee and got homemade cookies out with glasses of milk for the children when they returned from their adventure in the backyard. There was a lot of chatter around the family kitchen table, with the boys telling of all the events in their lives until today. Poor Grandpa couldn't keep up. After clearing the table, Robert asked Bill if a park was nearby with swings. "Yes," came Bill's reply. "Only 2 blocks away." So all the males departed. They walked to the park while the girls chatted, catching up on the last 10 years. The boys dashed ahead on the sidewalk, leaving them in their wake. Strolling along, Bill asked about Robert's occupation. Robert replied he was an engineer and part owner of a successful consultancy firm. For his part, Bill explained how he was an independent electrician owning a small business. He was currently training an employee in the trade and hoped the apprentice would take over the company when qualified so he could retire. An hour later, Robert got a phone call from Stephanie to say lunch was nearly ready and to come home. Entering the family house, Robert led the boys to the bathroom to wash their hands, and they adjourned to the kitchen table for lunch. Wendy had phoned Jeff's parents and spoke with Jeff's mother as they were good friends. It helped soften the way so they could meet their grandchildren. They were set to visit at 3 that afternoon. They followed the same procedure when visiting Jeff's family home. Stephanie introduced Mary, Peter, and Paul to their father's grandparents, then said, "This is my husband Robert, Jeff's parents, Ken and Sue." After an afternoon tea, Peter and Paul asked to be excused from the table, leaving the adults to chat amongst themselves. The boys were soon out exploring the backyard. However, there wasn't much to find, and before long they were back inside the house. Ken noticed they had become bored and brought out Jeff's large tin box of Lego blocks. When Peter and Paul discovered that the box contained many colored Lego blocks, their faces lit up. Ken was pleased with their happy, smiling faces. Sadly, it brought back fond memories of Jeff at their age. Thanking their grandfather, the boys proceed to connect Legos. It was another successful family reunion. Ken and Sue were invited to Stephanie's parents' home for a barbecue on Sunday at noon. On Wednesday afternoon, both families traveled to the local cemetery. Ken and Sue led the way to Jeff's grave. Stephanie pointed out to Peter and Paul their father's headstone. Peter said, "Mommy, I'm glad Dad let Paul and I keep Father's last name." Ken looked surprised and turned to Robert, who said, "I insisted the boys keep their father's surname." A relieved look passed over his face, and he said, "Thank you, Robert." They spent a week visiting Stephanie's extended family and cousins. Stephanie took Robert and the children on a sightseeing tour through the town. She showed them the school she had been to and where she had hung out with Jeff. Stephanie caught up with many school friends as well. They left feeling sad, promising both families they would keep in touch. Stephanie's parents wanted to visit them at their family home soon. On the way home, the boys made a Christmas wish list of toys to give to their newly acquired grandparents. The journey was a great family success to be repeated every couple of years. Soon, it was back to work for Robert, and school resumed for the boys. Mary started preschool 3 days a week. The next few years slipped by quickly. The boys reached 11 and 12 and joined the Pee Wee Ice Hockey round-robin competition Sunday afternoon. Before Robert knew it, he coached a team of 7 with Ian as manager. With enthusiastic parents' support, the team players voted on a name, calling themselves the Wasps. Ian's company sponsored hockey jerseys. Mary, along with Isabel and Isadora, were the official cheering squad. Most Sunday afternoons saw the family cheering the Wasps on to win while putting up with the unique hockey smell. Over the coming years, they won several local and away comps and had trophies on their shelves to show for it. It was nearing Stephanie and Robert's 10th wedding anniversary. Stephanie's and Jeff's parents were driving down to celebrate the family event. Peter was now 18, and Paul was 1 year behind. However, Paul had done 2 summer schools and was graduating with Peter at the end of the year. Then, they were both off to university the following year. Peter wanted to follow his dad and do structural engineering, but Paul, always good at drawing, decided to be a draftsman. They would be assets to the family consultancy business. To Stephanie's delight, Mary was still at home and would start high school the following year. Unfortunately, Judith had passed on. She was buried with her husband in their hometown. It seemed like only yesterday Robert was bouncing Mary on his knee. Now she was turning 18, a young woman. Peter and Paul graduated 2 years ago and now work for the civil engineering firm. They had purchased a 2-bedroom apartment and were dating Isadora and Isabel. Mary was in her senior year of high school and upwardly mobile. Not needed at home, Stephanie had decided she wanted more independence. She didn't want a fancy job and got her old job back at the bakery. Stephanie knew what was required of her, and most of the previous workforce was still there. She only worked 6 hours per day, 6 to noon. Robert viewed the situation as a happy wife and a happy life. Robert was hurrying to pick up Mary's birthday present when he was struck by a car running a red light. An ambulance rushed him to the hospital. Once his identity was established, the police informed Stephanie. Robert was subjected to a multitude of scans in a search for injuries. The doctor told Stephanie Robert was fortunate, only sustaining a broken wrist, but a head injury required he be put in an induced coma for 24 hours. Visits from the children, extended family, and work colleagues followed over the next few days as Robert's progress improved. As Robert lay in his hospital bed, he wasn't sure if this was all a dream, reliving actual events, or a mixture of both. His mind slipped back over the past months. It was after the bakery's Christmas party when a cloud appeared over their marriage. The restaurant had a live band. Robert was excited to do some dancing and romancing with Stephanie. However, shortly after arriving, Robert noticed a tall Hispanic man in his late 20s giving Stephanie a predatory eye. Stephanie wore a new royal blue evening dress that pinched in at the waist and flared over her hips, showing off her full figure. The dress swayed gracefully as she walked. Robert had trouble keeping my eyes off her delightful derriere. She showed a bit more cleavage than usual. Nevertheless, Robert was happy and looking forward to some good loving later that night. After the meal, Stephanie and Robert danced a couple of numbers before Jim drew him away. He wanted Robert's expert opinion of the proposed bakery expansion, so we spent some minutes discussing the design. Then, turning back to the dance floor, Robert saw his wife and a Hispanic man dancing much closer than Robert thought was necessary. Robert noticed his hand moving toward Stephanie's bottom in a caressing motion. To Robert's delight, she grabbed it and returned it to her waist. Robert asked Jim, "Who is that man dancing with Stephanie?" "Ronaldo," came Jim's reply. "Our new pastry chef from Madrid, Spain. He's been with us for 3 months and he's a hit with the ladies, always got a new one on his arm." Robert didn't like what he saw. Thankfully, the band stopped playing and Stephanie returned to his side. After the party at home in the bedroom, Stephanie changed into a long flannel nightdress and seemed totally disinterested in intimacy, which agitated Robert. After all, she deliberately wore an elegant evening dress designed to attract Robert's attention, flirted with him wantonly, danced with him provocatively, stayed affectionately close, her arm in his, and kissed him on the cheek regularly. But in the end, nothing. Then Robert wondered if he had misread all her signals. He suddenly felt inadequate. She had never done that before. A depressing thought came to him. Maybe she was dressing and acting for Ronaldo. A darkening cloud seemed to hang over the marriage, and there was very little Robert could do about it. Stephanie was incredibly moody over the next few weeks, no matter how much Robert tried to be on her good side with flowers and dinner at fine restaurants. Robert rose with her each morning at 6, making coffee and helping to start her day. He generally cleaned up after himself, leaving the toilet seat down, all to no avail. On Sunday afternoon, Robert screamed in frustration while in the garden shed, which only brought a worried Stephanie to the door asking, "Have you injured yourself?" When no injury was found, she stalked off in a huff. Robert was at his wit's end. The final straw was entering the family home one lunchtime midweek to discover Stephanie and Ronaldo in their matrimonial bed making love. At the doorway, Robert felt like a dagger had been thrust into his heart listening to Stephanie chanting Ronaldo's name while in the throes of passion, telling him how good a lover he was. Ronaldo murmured just loud enough for Robert to hear, "Better than your wimpy marido?" "Yes," she shouted. Robert woke suddenly in a sweat and had no idea where he was. His heart was beating so fast he thought it might explode. 1 minute, he watched his wife make love with Ronaldo. The next, he appeared to be in a hospital bed. Perhaps he had a heart attack and ended up there? A nurse and doctor arrived as Robert attempted to pull off all the tubes attached to his body. When they stopped him, they explained about the car accident. The doctor told him sometimes coma patients have very realistic dreams, and any partial memory loss would fully return in the next few days. Stephanie arrived an hour later. She was a welcome sight. They hugged and kissed, and Robert's coma-related dreams started to fade. The children turned up after a time and looked forward to Robert's return to the family home. After coming out of the coma, he stayed in the hospital under observation. The next day, Robert's memory slowly started to return. However, he still wasn't sure if the dream was real or imagined. Was Stephanie cheating? Still very confused, Robert worked himself into a state of high anxiety when Stephanie arrived for her daily visit. Still dressed in her bakery clothes, she dropped into the seat. Robert burst out, saying, "I had a vivid dream. In it, you were cheating on me with Ronaldo. Tell me it didn't happen." Stephanie burst out laughing. Robert was surprised at her reaction to his accusation. Now concerned at his apparent distress, Stephanie leaned over and kissed him. "You silly man. I would never cheat on you." Stephanie proceeded to explain to Robert details of Ronaldo's exploits in the workplace over the last month. He was free with his hands on some female workers who had complained to Jim, who was making for a bad workplace, hence her moody behavior. Finally, Stephanie said, "Ronaldo went too far and patted my bottom while I was bending over, rolling out dough. I had flour on my hands. Surprised, I swung around and slapped his face, leaving a white handprint on his left cheek. The slap was so loud Jim was there in seconds to see a stunned Ronaldo. I bawled Ronaldo out, 'You touch me again, and I'll have you up on SA charges.' Jim interceded quickly, taking Ronaldo into his office. The outcome was Ronaldo's final reprimand. Next incident, he would be fired no matter how good a pastry chef he was. So, dear husband, you have nothing to worry about. Now get well. I have missed you in my bed." A smiling Robert lay back in the bed. That's family, and he wouldn't wish it any other way.